As we get further into 2023, a really interesting two-paced rental market is starting to emerge. And when I say two-paced, we're still seeing a great many properties let like clockwork. We've become accustomed over the last 12 to 18 months of properties letting in really just a few days, such as the demand for rental property. And whilst that still is the case, we're now just starting to see a slight shift in that pattern. When properties are perhaps overpriced or not properly marketed, they are starting to stay on the market for longer. Let's have a look in a bit more detail. So for the month of February 2023, here are our vital statistics. On average, it took 18.7 days between the property going on the market to an offer being accepted by the landlord. The average rent we've been agreeing has been 98.7% of the advertised rent. Now let's just look at that for a little bit longer. That actually does constitute a bit of a shift. It sounds impressive, 98.7%, it's a high figure, but we've been accustomed to that being 99 to 100% really over the last 12 to 18 months. The whole principle of a tenant making an offer below asking has almost been lost during that time. Well, we are now just starting to see it again, and I'll talk about why in a bit more detail in a moment. Average rent increases, that's the rents we've been agreeing when we're letting new properties versus the rent that was being paid by the previous tenant, an increase of 10.3%. Just last month I reported an increase of 4.5%, so that's really been pushed up. And I think that we can join all of these statistics together to make a really valuable point. I want to drill into a bit more detail about the first statistic, and that is the amount of time it's taking to let a property. So if we go all the way back to January 2022, this little chart that I've made, which I'm very pleased with, shows on average how long it's taken to let a property month by month between January 2022 and now, February 2023. Now you can see the absolute peak of our activity was between the months of January and August, when really on average it would take 5, 6, at the most 7 days to find a tenant for an available property. And now you can see that towards the end of last year and into early this year, that has really increased. And now we're getting towards 20 days per property. So really quite a significant increase. Why has that been the case? Well, if we go back to the other statistics that I mentioned, the average rent that we're achieving has dropped just slightly, and the average rent has gone up by 10%. So what we're seeing is while some properties are letting very quickly, those properties that have seen their rent pushed up maybe slightly too ambitiously by the landlords, it's taking longer to find tenants for those properties, whilst the properties that are advertised at maybe a more realistic rent have gone in a matter of days. We have to wait for those properties to clear out of the way before tenants will then take the properties that have been advertised at a more ambitious rent. Or perhaps it's taking more time for the landlords of those properties to consider lowering the rent to a more realistic target. So yes, we are seeing rents being pushed up more than ever before, and we are achieving asking rent for most of the properties that we're letting. But I think we are starting to see that the cost of living is increasing. Tenants are staying in their homes for longer, so they are being more considered when it comes to choosing the next property that they move to. So please bear that in mind when you are valuing the rent that you're going to advertise your property at when it comes to the market. Speak to an expert and take their advice into account, because if you pitch it too high, then there is a limit to what you can achieve. Whilst supply of properties is not adequately feeding demand from tenants, that doesn't mean that you can put the rent up as high as you like. You do need to be realistic if you want to find a tenant in a good, sensible time frame. Let's move on to just how much interest is there from tenants. Well, here's the statistics for the number of new prospective tenants that we registered in February. Now, a dramatic drop from January, but actually that's not unusual. In January, we always see a flurry of new interest from people who have been waiting until Christmas and the winter months are out of the way to register for their new home. And then in January, we see people coming to us saying, right, new year, new me, I'm going to go out and find a new home. So despite the drop off from January, we can see that actually compared to February 2022, we've seen an uplift in interest. More people registering to find new homes in 2023 than in 2022. So yes, there is still a huge amount of demand from tenants, and there is still an inadequate supply of properties to satisfy that demand. So rents will still keep going up this year, mark my words. That is the scene in Bath. A quick look at what's going on across the rest of the country. And I thought I'd mention there's been a lot of newspaper headlines and media reporting about EPCs. This is a really hot topic at the moment for landlords. And it ties in very nicely with the event that we're holding on the 15th of March here in Bath at the Francis Hotel, where we're going into all sorts of depth and detail on the subject of energy efficiency and EPCs. If you are locally based, there's 12 tickets remaining as I'm recording this, so please do contact me or follow the link in the video description to book onto that event. But this is really worth keeping an eye on with these proposals, these targets that are being set by the government in 2025. We still don't know 100% sure if that's going to be confirmed or not, so please do watch this space and I'll bring you more news as we have it. The other hot topic is, of course, rental reforms and the government's proposal for that. We're really no further along the line in terms of knowing when that's going to be implemented. It seems certain that it will be, but your guess is as good as mine in terms of when that's going to come. We do know that we're starting to creep towards the prospect of a general election. So will the government be able to implement these new proposals and reforms that they're planning before that election? I don't know. Whatever happens in that general election, and we're looking a little further down the line now, it is certain that reform will come to our sector, because whichever party is in power the other side of that election, I think they all have their own fairly ambitious plans. Again, more on that when I know it. That's all for the month of February 2023, and I'll see you next time.